Ask me what my name is or something. Well, no, you can write it on it or something.
Yeah, that's fine. So what we're basically doing here is we're going to talk about like your life.
My life.
And how interesting it has been.
Sorry. Yes.
And rewarding.
Yes.
But that's also come at a cost at times.
Well, you know, you don't get anything for nothing, do you? That's the point, I think. You never get anything for nothing. You think you do, especially when you're young. You think you can just, power ahead and it'll all be all right. It'll all be all right, and then you realise that nothing comes for nothing. God said, "Take what you want, and pay for it." But you don't always know when you're going to pay for it or quite how. And sometimes you don't think you are paying for it when you are. Sure sounds very mystical, but it's
quite poignant, really.
That's how it is. Because I'm 65 now, so I've seen enough to know that that's true.
So you were born what year?
I was born in 1955, the year that Bill Haley released "Rock Around the Clock."
Wow.
Yes, I was born with rock and roll, and I was born in Colchester Barracks. And you can hear my scout is calling. The beloved is calling. Let him in.
I can't get out.
You can't get out. All right. Oh God! Hold the camera a moment. I have to let the cat in. Yeah. I just got comfortable then as well. Oh. Come on then, hairy fool. Come on. After you. After you.
I swear he's a vampire. You've got to invite him in. Come on then.
After you.
Come on then. There you go.
Right. I have to get settled again now. Oh, here we go. Yes.
So I'll ask you the question again of, where were you born and when?
Where was I born and when? I was born in Colchester Barracks, Colchester Army Barracks, in 1955, the year that Bill Haley released "Rock Around the Clock." So rock and roll and I were born at the same time. And come on then. Sorry, I'm talking to the cat. It was quite. I mean, I didn't get told any of this till I was much older, because obviously in those days people didn't talk about birth and pregnancy really and things like. We forget that now, but it was the case. It wasn't discussed. But I was actually born dead. And not only was I born dead, but I was born with jaundice. So I was a forceps delivery. So I was a dead yellow pointy-headed baby, and my mother, of whom more later, had been given gas and air. So she was off with the pixies, and largely never returned. And during the course of this, which was home birth, they propped the bed up somewhat so that gravity would aid the baby. And all this propping and such like collapsed. So as the bed collapsed, as was the doctor had hold of my head with the forceps, and basically I was exploded dead into the world, and more or less ended up on the sideboard across from the bed, where I was. They attempted to revive me as quickly as possible, and my father was outside. My father was like the biggest Scotsman ever. He was probably about 6'5" or something, and a big chap. And he was in his full regimental Highland Light Infantry uniform, which was very beautiful. And he'd basically drunk a bottle of Glenmorangie to celebrate the birth of his first child, so he was probably...
Laphroaig.
No, me or Laphroaig, whichever, he liked both. So he was probably absolutely piss drunk. Anyway, they got him in and said, if you got to give us your blood, save the child. And he went, certainly. And so my dad did. And they did a home blood transfusion, not once but twice, in order to get me to live. So basically, eventually I went, like we lived. And that's how it was really. But he didn't stay long in the army after that. He was a captain at that point, and my mother didn't like it. She didn't like the army life. They didn't think they were. Although she was from an army family, so she should have known what it was going to be like. Her father was a major. She really should have known, but she decided she didn't like it and she wanted to have a more glamorous life. So she made him come out of the army, which was the love of his life, really, and be an executive. But of course we didn't have any money or anything, so we had to move in with my grandmother.
But executive sounds
fancy. Great, doesn't it? Fancy.
Yeah.
Executive. The wife of an executive sounds really much fancier than an army wife. And
so she had aspirations.
My mother, yes, she did have aspirations. She had been engaged previously to a very wealthy young aristocratic man, who I've seen a photograph of him. He was terribly handsome, and he was a submariner. And he was a submariner or he was navy. I never worked out which. It changed, but let's just say he was navy. And there's a photograph of him looking terribly dashing in a white polo neck, like they used to wear in those days, the navy. And she'd envisaged herself, I think, as being a sort of in a good county family. She learnt to ride to please his family. She did all of this, and I think she thought of balls and events and society, and she was very beautiful, especially in the fashion of the day, which is always a good thing, because if you're beautiful and you're fashionable looking, it's a double thing. And I think she was just distraught when he died, and I think she married my father on the rebound because he was large and funny and kind
and protective
and very protective. Yes, and he continued to protect her throughout her entire life, but to the absolute utmost of his ability. Which didn't leave a lot of room for me, really, but there we go. But anyway, we all moved. I was 6 months old, and we moved to my grandmother's house, which was a very, very small end terraced house in Cosham near Portsmouth, and we lived there. And then my grandfather was still alive at that point, and that's my mother's father. He had a nervous break. He suffered what we would now call PTSD from his war experiences, and because he was one of the crew officers in the crews that went round after Auschwitz and Belsen to the villages around and to the various companies and factories and stuff, and got depositions as to did they know what was going on, and they'd always obviously say no, we had no idea, but he said you could smell it.
You couldn't actually quantify that back then because we knew what shell shock was back then.
Oh, he had nerves. Nerves.
Yeah.
It was always nerves, and they gave him ECT, which is electroconvulsive therapy, which is a brutal thing at the best of times. So he was not great, but he loved me, and he apparently, although I've got no memory of this, he wanted to do all the looking after of me, and he would get up in the night and say to my mother, stay there, it's fine, I'll do this, and he would walk around with me until I quietened down or whatever. And who knows what I was thinking as a baby, having just been dead and then been alive. I can't imagine. But anyway, I was prone to being uncomfortable, and restless baby. And so he did all of that. But then unfortunately he died of a heart attack. And then only about, can't have been more than about 18 months later, my mother's brother, my uncle, who I have no memory of at all, had a brain hemorrhage in Aden and was flown home by the RAF. He was in the RAF, and he died. So his wife and his two daughters also came to live in this tiny end terrace. I mean, the bathroom was so small that I once burnt my arse by backing up onto the oil-fired radiator. Because you couldn't turn around, it was that small, and God knows how my dad managed, because he was enormous. But so the house was full of bereaved women.
So you grew up you came into the world born dead.
Yes.
And then grew up in a world
in a house of death. Yes, and bereavement and loss, and people suddenly bursting into tears for no reason, and throwing themselves out of the house, you know, and having to go for long walks, and just sobbing quietly, and that was normal to me. You know, people weren't happy. Nobody was particularly happy. I don't remember anybody being, you know, jolly and cheerful. They drank a lot. There was a lot of drinking and smoking. Everybody smoked like trains.
What was the fashionable cigarette of the day?
Oh God, I don't know. Navy cut or something. No, I'm sure it was something a bit more Tony than that. But you know, it was they just all smoked like mad players probably, and drank either gin or when they couldn't afford gin, Merry Down cider. I remember that because I actually can't tolerate cider because I can't tolerate the smell.
Not a lot's changed in the
house. Not a lot's changed. No, not a lot's changed in the world. No. So, so everybody would sit in my grandmother's front room, which was tiny and absolutely boiling hot because she had a coal fire, which was stoked up to you know, furnace heat at all times. All these women getting drunker and drunker, and there was a thing. They were always on diets. Always on diets, and occasionally they'd go, oh, let's just go mad, let's just have a bacon and egg sandwich. And this, I thought for years as a child, was the absolute high point of luxury and indulgence. It was a bacon and egg sandwich.
Unnecessary food.
Oh, crazy
unnecessary
food,
time,
you know, like, oh, you know, mad food.
Not even between lunch
no,
or
no,
it was
no,
like
no,
just
let's have a bacon and
like
egg
a
sandwich.
snack,
You know,
yeah,
like,
treat.
Yeah, treat. So, you know, I thought this was the best food ever. It still is the best food ever. But anyway. So it was weird. Unfortunately, my two cousins, female cousins, they really didn't have a lot to do with me. They were somewhat older. They were teenagers, basically. And the older one she didn't like me at all.
Why?
I think she was jealous. I think she looked, there's this kid, you know, she's got a dad, I haven't got a dad. I had a lovely house in Aden with servants, and you know, there was a swimming pools and there was dances, and you know, it was all lovely, and now I've got to come back and live in this poxy little end terrace in a poxy little part of the country where, you know, which was a bit rough. Because it was a bit rough. The whole street was actually a bit rough. When I look back at it now. I mean, there were women of what they used to call dubious virtue who lived at the other end of the street, and we knew that they were of, you know, quote unquote dubious virtue because they wore black bras under white blouses and had ankle bracelets and smoked in the street, which was considered to be awful.
When Sophia Loren did that,
when Sophia Loren
said
did
it was
that,
just
it was just Italian. You know, it was Italian. It's all right for it's Italian.
Yeah, but if you're in Portsmouth,
it's never in Pompey, mate. No, it's not. It's not the height of fashion. So we all lived there together. One of my cousins was very arty. That was nice. And she used to draw all the time, so I was aware of drawing. And my grandfather had been, before his death, had been very craft orientated, and built, you know, full rigged galleons from scratch, not from a kit, from balsa wood and, you know, rigging string and stuff. So we were always aware that that sort of thing went on. But it wasn't. I don't remember. I mean, people talk to me about their childhood, and they go, you know, like, oh, we'd have a big hug, you know, and everybody would be hugging. You know, but I would never remember being hugged. There was one occasion that I always remember of being a child. Was I of course got every childhood illness that you could possibly get. I mean, it was ridiculous. And I got measles really, really badly. And people don't really understand what measles is now. They think it's just a few spots and a bit of a fever, but it wasn't. I was like half blind, half deaf. I was like, you know, really, really in and out at this point. And my mother very rarely did this, but she decided she'd come and sit on the bed and read to me. And she was, of course, beautifully attired, you know, and made up and smelling gorgeous, you know, Joy by Jean Patou. Which smells very strongly of Lily of the Valley, and she started reading Winnie the Pooh, and she read the section which anybody who's read that book will had it read to them will know is the bit where where Piglet looks down into the pit where they think they've trapped the heffalump, and sees Winnie the Pooh banging around with a jar on his head and thinks it's a heffalump, and runs off crying piteously, "Hef, hef, a horrible heffalump! Hoff, hoff, a horrible hef." Anyway, this goes on. This reduced my mother to, like, just, I think she was probably very worried as well. She's just hysterical. She just couldn't stop laughing and crying and laughing, and I was obviously laughing and choking and, like, you know. And then my auntie came up and said, you know, like, what on earth's going on? And then my mother was trying to read this to her, and then she caught the gig. He's catching giggles. Everybody. Then my cousins came up, they caught it. Then my gran came up and went, you know, what on earth's going on? And caught it too. So my dad came back from the pub, I think, and found all these women lying on this sick kid's bed giggling.
So this upbringing wasn't without humour and lightheartedness, as the example that you've given there.
That was about it, though. To be honest with you, I'll be fair. That was about it.
We're coming to the end of this episode, but I think that obviously your mum wasn't without humour amongst all that.
She was a very difficult person.